28 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is meeting today to continue its work on the operational security of the parliamentary precinct along Wellington and Spark Street. I would like to welcome the following witnesses. We have Patrick McDonnell, Sergeant at Arms and Corporate Security Officer, and Larry Brookson, Director with the Parliamentary Protective Services. So I would like to welcome you to PROC Committee. Thank you for coming back to join us. And I'll just remind all members that all comments should be made through the chair. With that, we'll start with Mr. Brookson.
Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable MPs. Je suis heureux d'être avec vous.
I'm very happy to be with you today to deal with you and have some exchanges on matters of physical security. As the acting director for the service, I can assure you that being invited to take part in this dialogue is heartening and of critical importance to me and also to my colleagues.
While I will keep my opening remarks brief, I propose and highlight a few key points. First, collaboration and partnerships. The service is responsible for the physical security of parliamentarians, staff and employees, visitors, buildings, grounds, assets on Parliament Hill and the precinct. To fulfill this mandate, the service must continue to be proactive in how it networks and builds partnerships with its security and law enforcement partners. How well the service responds to any complex threat or situation is not only a measure of where it is at that day, rather it is a reflection of how it has prioritized trust and relationship building over time. Que ses partenaires
These relationships, whether with our parliamentary corporate security partners or with external organizations, were key to how we responded to the occupation for those 23 days earlier this winter, and will continue, I would say, to be pivotal to our operational readiness in the future. Continuous improvement. No matter how well an organization responds to a situation, there are always lessons learned. In 2020, when I was Chief Operations Officer for the service, I created a unit dedicated to ensuring that our operations would be provided with mechanisms for proactively applying lessons learned as to how we continue our readiness and response operations.
Activities like scenario-based training and tabletop exercise. This team, called the Operation Evaluation and Continuous Improvement Unit, now plays a key role in the service's ability to learn from its response to any complex events and helps ensure the findings be integrated across the service. The OECI is key to ensuring the service optimizes every learning opportunity it uncovers. Finally, I do want to raise a point of taking a multi-layered approach to physical security. Physical security is not solely about having strong barriers, optimally trained protection officers, or advanced technology. Rather, it's about the triangulation of all three of these elements. La préparation
Operational. Our service's operational readiness and response capacity is really a function of how physical barriers, human assets, and technology work together to create an integrated physical security system to optimally serve this community.
I recognize today's exchange is conducted in a public matter. I will do all I can to contribute to the discussion while respecting the confidential nature of certain details. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. McDonnell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bonjour.
Good morning. I'm Patrick McDonnell. I'm the Sergeant at Arms of the House of Commons. I'd like to thank you for having invited me here again to address the committee. As you know, I did appear before your committee on February the 8th to discuss questions about security. And I was...
There is no French or English interpretation.
It's not working. Est-ce que ça...
Is that working now for you? Is it working now for you? Kelly, can you hear? Can you hear me in English?
Je recommence ou
Should I begin again?
Madame la Chair?
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning. I'm Patrick McDonough, and I'm the Sergeant-at-Arms of the House of Commons. And I thank you for having invited me here this morning to address the committee again. As you know, I appeared before your committee on February the 8th to discuss security questions. And I was accompanied by the Deputy Clerk Administration on April 28, 2022, to discuss the broadening of the parliamentary precinct.
Openly about sensitive matters involving security on the Hill and MP's security off the Hill. Security matters, when discussed before the Board of Internal Economy, are legislatively mandated under the Parliament of Canada Act to be discussed in camera. Some information, if made public, could increase the vulnerability of the House of Commons security posture, the Parliament buildings, parliamentarians, and other persons within the parliamentary precinct. As head of the Office of the Sergeant-at-Arms and Corporate Security, my team works in close collaboration with its partners to provide a secure environment for members of Parliament, employees, and visitors on the Hill. Simply put, our job is to ensure safe and secure access to members, their staff, and the administration once they arrive on the precinct. Working in tandem with our partners in the Parliamentary Protective Service and the Senate Corporate Security, we adapt our practices proactively and continuously, while also responding to evolving security risks. My colleagues in PPS are responsible for the physical security of members within the precinct, and the police of jurisdiction is responsible for the physical safety of all citizens off the precinct, which we know begins at the north sidewalk of Wellington Street. In these challenging times, things move quickly. New threats are constantly emerging, so it is worth repeating that in no way can we work in isolation. We collaborate closely with our partners both on and off the Hill for a coordinated approach to ensure the safety of its people, its assets, and heritage. Je le répète, notre...
As I said, our first duty is to assure the safety of members. We are aware of the fact that prevention and early intervention can allow us to defuse any threats and dangers that arise for them. As I have said, I am very happy to appear before you, but I hope you understand that I am not free to say anything and everything, given the fact that this is a publicly held meeting. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonnell.
The comments that have been shared this morning. We will enter into 6-minute rounds, but I do want to just remind members that we will be entering into a vote, so the bells will be starting shortly. Is there a desire for members to want to perhaps do like we did last time and continue comments and questions for about 20 minutes and then return to the chamber well in time for the vote?
I think if we have 10 minutes to get to the chamber, that's sufficient.
Perfect. So I would ask that the screen for the bells be turned on once the bells start, and then all members can, and I'll keep an eye on that as well. So 6 minutes round starting. We will go with Mr. Viss will commence, followed by Mrs. Sahota, and then Madame Goudreau, et puis Madame Blaney.
Followed by Ms. Blaney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Madam Chair, thanks Mr. Brookson and McDonnell for being present here today. Through you, Madam Chair, did the Parliamentary Protective Services request from the Government of Canada to invoke the Emergencies Act in February?
Through you, Madam Chair, no.
Through you, Madam Chair, to each of our witnesses, did the Royal Canadian Mounted Police provide you with all of the support, personnel, material, or technical which you had requested immediately upon your request during the Freedom Convoy protests? And was there any shortcomings in the support provided?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think the specifics of the question, it speaks to the request that was made just to have situational awareness on the vehicles that were parked out front of Wellington. The request for CBNRE sensing was made to National Division of the RCMP, not to the Ottawa Police. That's not their mandate. And unfortunately, that was not fulfilled simply because of the technology gap that the RCMP had in what would be required to be detected, and it was considered to be unsafe for some of those members to walk through that street and sensing vehicles.
The Parliamentary Protective Service is a security service. Policing and security are two very different professions with different workforces, career paths, and skill sets. Through you, Madam Chair, would both witnesses agree with that statement?
Yeah. Through you, Madam Chair, are we talking specific about the RCMP or Parliamentary?
No, the Parliamentary Protective Services.
Would you be kind enough just to repeat that
Yeah,
question? For me,
policing and security are two very different professions with different workforces, career paths, and skill sets. Is that a correct statement?
Well, I'll only speak to the protective mandate which the Parliamentary Protective Service holds. To be clear,
Okay.
the Parliamentary Protective Service is not a policing organization, so it does not have a policing mandate. The recruiting that the service undertakes is to ensure that all requirements of delivering the mandate of protecting parliamentarians, staffers, and members of the public is secured.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, would an expanded physical jurisdiction for the PPS with the same legal mandate be a feasible undertaking?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, it would.
Thank you. In your opening comments, Mr. McDonnell, you obviously referenced what took place. I was in my office. I think the second or third day after, the first day after Parliament was functioning. It was shut down for one day. And I remember having the news on in the background in my office when I was writing my speech on the Emergencies Act. And there was lots of emails going back and forth coming up on my computer screen about whether we could enter the precinct or not. And even though the Parliament was open that day, and I remember seeing on TV, like literally 100 RCMP officers and the protesters right outside my office on Valor, and getting these emails at the same time. And I remember I had to walk down through the protests and the RCMP officers who were there. And when I got to the gates of Parliament, the gates were locked. And I thought, wow, if I was ever in a crazy constitutional predicament, it is right now. Can you speak to the protocol or lessons learned in that situation? Because I don't think there's many times in the history of Canada where literally the gates of Parliament were locked. And as a member, my privilege was being compromised in that moment from entering the Parliament itself in that critical moment when we were debating the Emergencies Act. If either of you would like to comment on that situation, I know I'm probably not the only member of Parliament who's raised that scenario with you in the last few months.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall that day, and I think the barrier, the gate was locked. Should have been unlocked when you came up. Prior to that, during the overnight hours and early mornings, people were being referred mostly to the bank in Wellington. So I think it was an oversight not having the gate open and then keeping you on the other side and preventing you from coming up, if I recall the date correctly. Yeah, it's one of those things that shouldn't happen. So lesson learned. At the same time, there was lots going on that particular day, and people were multitasked. So I can understand the oversight, but I'm also quite understanding of the anxiety one would feel arriving at a locked gate when they have to get into the chamber for a debate.
Especially during the invocation of the Emergencies Act, nonetheless. Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
35 seconds.
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Sahota, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think as we are debating now, or will start debating the hybrid parliament, I think it's good to be able to say that there are still benefits. Even that day, while people were locked out, you could log in through hybrid parliament and participate in debate, as I'm being able to do so today. Even though I have COVID, I'm able to participate today, and thankful for that. My first question is to Mr. Brookson regarding the lockdown that took place on June 11th. I was wondering if you could walk me through the occurrence of events as to when the call regarding the incident came in, or a call regarding that there was suspicious activity came in, who the call came in through, when it reached you, and then on to the Ottawa Police Service.
Through you, Madam Chair. So that call came in just before noon, and this was information that was received by our partners with respect to intelligence at the time that was suggesting a serious threat. My position has been clear in delivering this mandate and making.
Which partners, Mr. Brookson?
Would have been the RCMP and Ottawa Police Service. Sorry for that lack of clarification. The threshold, I've always made it clear that my threshold for ensuring the protection and security of parliamentarian staffers and the public is much lower than that would be found in the criminal element of what the mandates are for policing services. On the information that was received to me, it was without hesitation to shut down Parliament due to the threats that had been received. And then with respect to the investigational part of it, that falls back to the law enforcement partners, specifically the lead being Ottawa Police Service, to conduct that investigation, as the Parliamentary Protective Service has no mandate for criminal code investigations, as I've indicated already, that it's not a policing organization.
Have there been any conversations that have taken place regarding an investigation as to the person who called in the hoax?
That I leave to the police force of jurisdiction. Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I leave that to the police force of jurisdiction to conduct their mandate of conducting that criminal code investigation.
Will the PPS be involved, do you believe, at some point in that investigation?
Through you, Madam Chair, no. I don't anticipate any involvement in that, nor would I seek to have involvement in that aspect.
Well, what do you believe the cost for the lockdown that day may have been?
Through you, Madam Chair, unfortunately, I don't have those costs. I mean, there was definitely additional resources that we brought in to secure the precinct, but my apologies, I don't have those numbers with me.
Madam Chair, the action that was taken that day was swift, and we were notified. Unfortunately, I believe the French notification did go out a little bit later than the English notification. Do you believe the action that was taken was due in part to the lessons learned from the convoy?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not going to speculate as to me, I assess things on the information that's put in front of me, and I work with exactly what's in front of me, and I don't conject or add anything into it. So again, I'll reiterate, I take very seriously my role and responsibility in ensuring the protection of parliamentarians, and staffers, and members of the public when they are on the precinct.
Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Brookson, on his previous presentation to this committee, had said that there was concern during the convoy that there could be possibly possession of materials or explosives or other things during the convoy.
I'm just going to pause, Ms. Sahota. So just a reminder that the last time these witnesses appeared at our committee, it was an in-camera session.
Oh, thank you for that. There have been public articles written that there were concerns as to what the convoy protesters could have had in their possession. Just wondering why at that time there was not such swift action taken.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can't get into the details as to the security and the information that we had on hand at that time.
Okay. Wondering if with the rest of my time that I have, if I could share that with Mr. Turnbull.
Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, and thanks for being here today to both of you. When the Ottawa Police Service was here and testified, I asked them about MP and staff security and harassment during the occupation of Ottawa, and they had no information on that. I assume that's because PPS really has a mandate for MP security and safety. Can you speak to it, Mr. Brooks, and can you speak to how frequent were the threats and security concerns shared by MPs and their staff during the occupation?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can only speak to just my presence within the building. I mean, we did receive information, and rightfully so. We had members of Parliament that were trying to walk through crowds of individuals, which I had no situational awareness of. So I was equally concerned on some of the concerns I was hearing back from parliamentarians. But as far as respective numbers or calls for service, that I don't have or can't speak to.
So without a specific number, would you say that there were ongoing concerns daily throughout that occupation that MPs and their staff had?
Just through you, Madam Chair, I'll only say this is it's my role to have those concerns for members of Parliament. And so I can tell you how concerned I was throughout that period, and I was extremely concerned. And that's the role of my responsibility and the service is to take on those concerns and make sure that the necessary pieces are in place to ensure as much protection as we can. I'll defer over to Madam Chair, if I can, to Mr. McDonnell to add.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Turnbull, we had communication with staff and MPs on a daily basis who felt harassed coming through the crowds. Some had a lot of anxiety coming through the crowds. Some had their cars banged on, blocked, coming in through the Lion Wellington street entrance into the parking lot. It was a daily thing, actually, at Lion and Wellington. One individual every day would block certain employees' cars, and if it was a female employee, he would bang on their car before moving aside. And we had one instance where just before coming up the steps of the off Wellington, one female employee was accosted by a gentleman, and he tried to throw a bag of what appeared to be human feces on her. And a male employee came to her rescue and pushed the assailant to the ground, and they left.
Thank you for that. And before we proceed to Madame Goudreau, I will just remind, and I think Mr. Brookson, you put it really fittingly at the end of your comments, that you will try to share as much information as possible. When it comes to security matters, oftentimes they are not taking place in these kind of forums, so we just need to be mindful of what witnesses can provide and what we might be aware of versus what we can share. Madame Goudreau, avez-vous la parole?
Merci, Madame la.
You have the floor, Madame Goudreau. Thank you. In previous questions, and I want to thank you for being with us again, dear witnesses. On January 13th, that was the moment when the former chief of police was alerted to what seemed to be heading this way. You were warned around noon. Was it on January 13th as well, or was it later?
Madame, voulez-vous dire que
Do you mean the 13th of January, that we were aware of the fact that the convoy was coming? Well, the chief of police of Ottawa was officially alerted to the convoy on Thursday, January 13. For me, it was January 11. All right, the 11th of January. When then did you have the first meeting of the 6 services at the command post, at the command center?
Through you, Madam Chair. The week before, c'était la semaine avant que.
It was the week before the convoy arrived in Ottawa that we started to have discussions with the different police forces, specifically, though, with the police, the Ottawa City Police, and the RCMP. The PPS?
In our preparation. But the collaboration, we had a sense, even within the service, that this was going to be bigger than us, much bigger than us. The concern of just that many vehicles heading to Ottawa was extremely concerning to the service. It's important the service really understands the importance of this precinct and the business that gets conducted here. And so those conversations on trying to increase that sensitivity and awareness began almost right away.
Donc, ce que je comprends.
So, from what I understand, unfortunately, there was a breakdown, if you like, in communication in an emergency situation. There was work in silos, which is really unacceptable, Madam Chair, because our members who are here to prevent and to intervene, but we are also here to ask questions. This question: if the parliamentary precinct were larger, would you be able to provide services, preventative services, upstream services? Because my question is quite simple, given what you've just said. If you couldn't communicate, and if you couldn't pass certain powers on with the precinct as it is now, I have a difficulty seeing, if it's larger, how we would be better protected. So if there is an extension of the parliamentary precinct, and say if we have offices on Sparks and there are administrative offices on Queen, will you be able to provide adequate security with a larger precinct?
Through you, Madam Chair, the quick response is yes. It's hard to imagine somebody being responsible for a protective mandate when the largest artery that runs through your precinct is outside of my control. So I'm left with the powers of attempting to influence others to make decisions that I'm responsible for.
Et ma dernière question.
My last question, Madam Chair. My last question. Well, what do you think you will do with the few powers you have now, given the barricades that surround your service provision? What are you going to do on July 1st? You've learned lots of lessons, but what are you going to say to the public? Are you going to call on 6 other services? You're saying that what happened was unacceptable and should never happen again.
I think there's been lessons learned by everybody on what we had to go through last winter. I can tell you that I feel much more comfortable as to where the Ottawa Police is at currently in their preparations for Canada Day. I'm very comfortable as to where the RCMP is, and I'm very comfortable as to where the service is. So right now, with respect to July 1st, even with the fact that Wellington remains closed, at least I have significant influence with the City of Ottawa to make sure that it's tight. Certain barriers that have been there have not met my standards of protecting the triad. I'm concerned about sidewalks. I'm concerned about even a truck finding its way through. So it's not acceptable. That's part of our operational plan, and it will be sealed extremely tight. And that's our preparations for July 1st. And understanding that things change. Like unfortunately, we're still way out from July 1st, and things can change depending on the information that we receive.
J'ai un souci, par contre,
Madam Chair, I am concerned about something, though. In recent testimony, that they were talking about 2014, and there were lessons learned. I felt at times that there were, I felt uncertain. I didn't feel protected at certain times. But that being said, you can't provide for or foresee something that you don't know about. And so, if it's not the police services, knowing that the services that we have on the parliamentary precinct, we do have certain elements that are already in place that are there, but there has to be communication. I know things move fast, and I hope that what we are doing today will remove some of the obstacles that exist, because the safety and security of the elected members of Parliament and all the people here is really close to my heart. I hope that in future years, those people who want to get into politics will feel that they can and feel secure, because that's another point. I know what's happening on social media. There's a lot of prevention that has to be done, and I think the security services should be aware of the thousands of messages that are being posted. And that is a supplementary element that has to be taken into consideration. We lived through that in the past months. Thank you very much for your comments and this exchange.
Voulez-vous répondre?
Would you like to reply?
Madam Chair, just quickly, I absolutely appreciate the comments. And I'll just say this, that the relationship between the service and the Ottawa Police Service is extremely strong. The challenge that I have is that once a member of Parliament steps off the sidewalk onto Wellington, I have no authority. So in the past year or so, my direction has been, irrelevant if we don't have authority, I'll deal with that after the fact. But we are to engage if any of our MPs find themselves in distress. What I'm asking for is to remove that barrier of risking the service outward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Blaney, for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and as always, through you, I want to thank both of the witnesses for being here today and respect how difficult it is to testify publicly on things that are so important to us. So appreciate all of your hard work on this. If I could come to you first, Mr. Brookston, you talked earlier in one of your answers about the technical gap for knowing what was in the vehicles on Wellington. And I'm just wondering, that was a gap. Is it still a gap? And if it isn't, where are we in progress about addressing that?
Through you, Madam Chair. I can tell you that work is already underway in collaboration with the parliamentary community on, I can tell you it's completely recognized of the importance that we must look beyond just the human asset to protect our parliamentarians. There needs to be effective barriers, and there also needs to be sensing technology so that I get as much of an advance notice of when that threat is coming. And usually these threats that I'm most concerned about are the threats that are coming where the item of choice is not exposed, it's not out in the open. So that work is ongoing, and I'm very happy with the progress that's happening there. Obviously, it's not a small undertaking when we talk about something like that, so there'll be more to come, I think, in the coming months to see about closing that gap.
So in testimony that I heard from the former chief of police here in Ottawa, one of the things that concerned me greatly as a member who walked through it every day was the fact that that whole street in front of Wellington was completely blocked. And I did ask, why was there no attempt to block that street prior to the convoy arriving? And it seemed to me that the former chief of police felt that he did not have the information that he needed to make that decision. So I'm just wondering if I could get any feedback on if we knew, if there was anything known here, and was there any communication that happened between the two different facets of this?
Through you, Madam Chair. This really speaks to the difference of sensitivity of what my environment is. To me, it's not just about security risks, it's about a potential disruption to democracy in this country. Mm-hmm. So, again, my threshold is much lower as to what I would react to than what some of our law, but I can't speak on behalf of the Ottawa Police Service to what they knew and what the decisions they took at that time.
Okay. So I guess my next question is, during the Freedom Convoy, what were the major areas of concern around security, and how would expanding the precinct help or hinder you in being able to do the work?
I would have full control of the precinct, which I don't have right now, but I'm equally concerned about the Senate of Canada building. So that needs to be looked at, as well as to, I know the precinct was expanded a couple of years ago to include the sidewalk. From a security perspective, the sidewalk doesn't give me much. Yeah.
So So what would largely change if the precinct did expand? I sort of understand it was interesting, again, as a member walking through it. I had a lot of arguments as I walked to work every day, which was not necessarily the best way to experience that. But I also saw a lot of people struggling. So, one of the things that I was what I noted many times was people with mobility issues really having challenges getting through and trying to get places. So I guess if we change this, if the precinct expands, how are we going to make sure that people are able to move through it comfortably? And the other thing I'll add to it is there's a lot of discussion about having a pedestrian mall or access to people being able to sell things right in front of the house and having maybe a tram go through. I'm just wondering, are any of these being looked at, and is there any security concerns that we should be considering in terms of our recommendations to the House?
Through you, Madam Chair. The security concern for me would be permitting any vehicle to come down, smack down the middle of our precinct. The elimination, I would hope that the decision is not to reopen somehow Wellington Street in front of the Triad and between Block 2 and Block 1. With respect to what would change, the POJ is still the POJ. The relationship that the service has with the Auto Police Service is stronger. Compared to 3 years ago when I first arrived, it's extremely strong. They respond to our calls for service. The service has been built to hold the first 90 minutes of any sort of crisis. If I've picked up the phone, I've never received a no when I've asked for assistance from either the RCMP or from the Ottawa Police Service. And even the OPP during the occupation with respect to one of their public order teams that were under our command. So we're looking to formalize those relationships with a series of MOUs. My concern in wanting to do that is just sometimes we can't just build these on pure relationships between the organizations because those relationships can change. So that's one gap that I'm moving to close on. But there's outside of having our officers having authority specifically on Wellington, hopefully on Sparks and part of Elgin and a little bit more around Senate of Canada building, nothing else is going to change.
So another issue that has arisen through some testimony is the fact that sometimes Indigenous communities want to come here to do sacred work. Sometimes they want to come here to protest an issue. And there was a strong sense that how they are reacted to is very differently experienced than how other groups were reacted to. So I'm just wondering, is there any discussions internally, we don't need to know the details, but are they happening, around how to approach specific groups that may have a different way of protesting that needs to be acknowledged and recognize that there may be some racism that we need to face in this place?
Through you, Madam Chair. One of the things that I'm most proud of within the service is through our events planning and management unit and the outreach that we've built through appropriate training. So we get out front on these specialized groups to make sure that they have the ability to come to Parliament Hill. The service expects to have an open and free environment for Parliament Hill. As much as our role is to ensure the security of those that work and come here, it's also to ensure that democracy unfolds. So the service is not put in place to put up any barriers for any protests. We have the use of the Hill Committee, which all the parliamentary partners sit at. Those applications are reviewed, and those demonstrations will continue to happen on Parliament Hill, even with an expanded precinct. They will still continue to happen.
Thank you. We don't have enough time to go through the whole second round, but we are going to start with Mr. McCauley. Mr. McCauley, you'll have 5 minutes, and you've got about 30 seconds on standby from Mr. Viss earlier, and I will provide a little bit of leniency like I have to the other members. I figured Mr. Viss would only want you to have them, otherwise he would have said otherwise. So to you, up to 5 minutes through the chair.
I'll get around to sharing time with you, Mr. Gerritsen, don't worry. Gentlemen, welcome. I appreciate your time today. Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Brookson, was PPS aware of the city's plan to allow the protesters to set up on Wellington? My understanding is the protesters were in contact with the city in advance, and the city said, well, set up here, set up here, set up here. Was PPS part of that conversation?
Through you, Madam Chair, I was made aware of the plans that were put in place with respect to traffic and setup.
Well in advance?
Yeah, but the week before is when it was confirmed to me.
Okay. The obvious question is, I assume you said no, or I assume you said, what are you guys thinking?
Through you, Madam Chair, I raised concerns of having vehicles being able to come up in front of the triad. But again, Wellington's not part of my authority, right? So all I could do was have the discussions and raise those concerns with the partners, and ultimately the decision was taken to continue down that path and permit the
Would you be able to share the Ottawa Police's response to your concerns?
Through you, Madam Chair, no.
No? Okay. Through you, Madam Chair, when do you, Mr. Brookson, when do you think it went out of control from a protest to an out of control, sit down, like locked in, long-term protest? I don't interrupt you, Mr. Gerritsen. Please show the same respect.
You're never helpful.
You're being childish. Show some respect, Mr. Gerritsen. Sir,
members,
to
we'll
you,
just-
Mr. Brookson.
Through the chair.
Through the chair. Thanks.
The sheer numbers that were on track to be en route, traveling, understand that at any point in time in that travel to the city of Ottawa, it could disband, it could stop, it could return. The numbers, as they started to become the reality on the Friday, it was clear that this was going to go beyond the weekend.
Okay. You mentioned Wellington out of control, like the main artery out of your control. What would, in your mind and PPS's mind, would be needed? Is it just shutting down Wellington? Is it shutting down other streets? And where along Wellington would it stop? We've got the Confed, the mighty Confed as I call it, Supreme Court just down there, other offices further down the road. What areas would be needed in PPS's perfect world for the control that you commented on?
Through you, Madam Chair. Obviously, Wellington Street, Sparks, we'd be looking down to Kent, and then on the west side of the War Memorial, and then there still needs to be analysis assessment of the Senate of Canada building.
Through you, Madam Chair, have you had these talks with Ottawa Police? Do they concur? Or is it a matter, or is their opinion, no, leave it open?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't enter in those levels of discussions with the Ottawa Police Service. Ultimately, it's not their decision or...
But you have referred to a collaborative approach. Are there discussions to get their feedback, or does PPS require to wait further down the road before we make a decision? Like, I'd hate for this committee and government to be making decisions where you haven't even engaged with Ottawa Police yet, or RCMP for that matter.
Through you, Madam Chair, my responsibility is to direct the service with what I've got in front of me, okay, Mr. McCauley, and that's where I'm at.
That's fair. What would be the amount of added officers you would need in PPS if we had the expanded precinct as proposed?
Through you, Madam Chair. At this point in time, I don't have the numbers on that, Mr. McCauley. That would be a requirement of that assessment, because we talked about if the effective barriers. It's not just about throwing human assets at this to deliver the mandate. So,
Madam Chair, I just have one last question. You talked earlier about threats daily, including one person traveling down Lyon across Wellington, having their car banged on every day. I've got to ask, where is PPS? Where's the police? If this is happening every day, as has been stated, why isn't someone not contacting police for help? At one time I could see, but if it's happening every day, I'm flabbergasted why it would be allowed to continue if it did.
I was also flabbergasted. It happened on Wellington Street, and it wasn't in the PPS area of jurisdiction, through you, Madam Chair. It was in the Ottawa Police jurisdiction.
Are you aware if it was reported to the police?
It was done every day, and the police car was at within viewing distance. And we voiced our frustration with what was happening, and it was almost a
what was
daily
the police's reaction?
Occurrence.
It's not a big deal, or did they claim it didn't happen, or?
I can't comment on that. I wasn't there.
So I'm going to just let Mr. McDonnell finish your comments, and that will bring us to time.
Yeah, I finished, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Brookson, anything to add?
Nothing, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Excellent. And that will bring us to getting ready to vote. I think that's a good segue into that. And then we'll return with Mr. Fergus, followed by Madame Goudreau, Mrs. Blaney, and I'll provide more names as I get them. Thank you. Safe travels to your vote. We'll continue with the second round, and we have 5 minutes to Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses here. I'm going to ask 4 pretty quick questions. So, and I know that I'd like to share my time, if it's possible, with my colleague, Mr. Gerritsen. So,
Sorry, I do have time. It's okay.
Okay. Well, then we might have just a little bit more time. First of all, I'd just like to go back to a question that you had answered, Mr. Brooks, and to Mr. Viss. Mr. Viss asked you the question, did the PPS request the Emergencies Act? Can I ask a more fulsome question? Would any police force ask for an act to be invoked, or would they identify the tools that they would need for their operational challenges, and it's up to the elected officials to find the best tool available? Which would better describe the situation?
Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fergus, I appreciate the question, but I can't speak on behalf of law enforcement as to what tools they think they would need when dealing with any sort of a police matter.
Okay, so on that front, then because you had answered the question, I just wanted to know, was there any more nuance to the answer of that question?
Well, the only extra nuance, through you, Madam Chair, my apologies, would be there was no benefit whatsoever of the invocation of the Emergencies Act for the service. So there was no additional powers that were provided through that, again, simply because we're not a policing organization.
That's what I want to make, that's what I was trying to get at. So
Okay.
the PPS is not a policing organization.
Correct, Mr.
Which
Fergus.
then leads me then to my second question, in terms of testimony that we had heard earlier. I've been around this place for a number of years, through you, Madam Chair. I've been around this place for a number of years. I've seen what had happened in the hijacking of the bus incident. We saw what happened in October of 2014. And after every incident, it would be my sense that we respond in a very incremental type of approach. Have we reached the point that after February's occupation that we should respond in an incremental approach, or should we try to go for more wholesale changes, sort of a larger way of looking forward?
Through you, Madam Chair. If I understand your question correctly, Mr. Fergus, obviously the assessment analysis as to what exactly that needs to be, I think, is to come. So I await some of that work to be completed. Again, with respect to the authorities that I have, is shutting down the precinct when that threat level reaches a threshold that I'm no longer comfortable with. That's not something that I rely on the partners or anybody else to influence me on or to suggest otherwise. And my apologies, because I don't think that's answered your question.
No, I'm sorry. The approach which I was trying to take is that trying to say that in previous times we've always just tried to take a very incremental approach to improving the security around the Hill. Is this a time for incremental thinking, or should we be thinking beyond what happened in the past, and we should start thinking of what could be coming down the pipe in the years to come?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can't deliver a mandate if I'm on a linear path to anything. I ensure that the response is there to meet the threat when it appears itself. And we're talking into a different realm of a pure threat to Parliament. So it's tough for me to suggest how else I would be able to increment stuff up when I know what I'm here to protect.
Okay. On that front, in terms of the resources that you and Mr. McDonnell would need to making sure that you could be protecting not only Canadians in general and parliamentarians in particular and staff, would you just be seeking only human resources, or does security go beyond that? That it would be more infrastructure and human resources and other matters that I maybe can't imagine right now that would be necessary for you to do your job well.
Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fergus, the response, yes, I've indicated previously and in my opening remarks that the solution to this is not, just like it's not a hardening strategy, it in itself is important in providing a security fabric over the precinct, but that alone is not going to get us to where we need to be. Same can be said for just throwing human assets, security assets at it. Is not going to get us to where we need to be. In order for us to be effective, and me getting somewhat of a more comfortable as to what the precinct is at, is the inclusion of effective barriers and technology to ensure that situational awareness.
Thank you. Sorry to have taken up so much time.
Thank you. Madame Gaudreau, 2 minutes et demie.
2 minutes and
2.5 minutes, Madame Gaudreau. Only that. Thank you. We've just talked about efficiency and effectiveness. Here's my concern. Just imagine that you don't have enough human resources. You need to have for the perimeter adequate human resources. So how far can that go to meet the needs of parliamentarians? Because, there are some people who have secondary homes that are some kilometers away from the Hill. I talked about what we could do in terms of prevention and signaling the threat. It's not just people who are armed who are going to arrive. Sometimes people announce that they're going to arrive. Through you, Madam Chair, what extra needs will you have to respond?
Through you, Madam Chair. This is where it's really critically important that the service has the partners that it has. We talk about being an intelligence-led organization in order to serve the parliamentary community, and that's not going to change moving forward. The advance notice that we receive through intelligence and information that we receive gives us ample time to assess and analyze. And the service will spare no expense at responding effectively to ensure the safety of parliamentarian staffers and members of the public while they're on the precinct.
Donc,
So, with what we see then in the American Congress or elsewhere, where last weekend there could have been something serious happening, do you really have what you need to be able to react? Because what we want is to reassure people that everything necessary will be done, and there won't be situations that are always evolving. They're always new, that you'll be able to cope.
I'm extremely comfortable and pleased with the discussions that are currently underway with the parliamentary community at finding some other things. It can't be just dealt with from a single lane. This is a multi-faceted approach to increasing the security of the precinct and parliamentarians. I'm extremely comfortable. I'm very well supported by both speakers, by my counterparts at both corporate security directorates, and those discussions have already been initiated. And I'm quite pleased with the progress to date as to where those are going.
merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau. Madame Blaney.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and as always, through you, I would just like to ask one question of the both of you. I'll leave you to decide who's the best to answer it. But we've seen increasingly articles about a summer convoy visit, which is concerning, of course. And we know that we have some pretty important days like Canada Day coming up. And I'm just wondering if we're prepared for that, if there's any major concerns, and what lessons were learnt from the previous convoy that prepares this place for the summer one.
I'll go. Through you, Madam Chair. I'm As the team's preparations, and I've received 2 briefings. There'll be a briefing tomorrow afternoon for the parliamentary community to bring them through our preparations at securing the precinct for July 1st. My apologies, I'm not going to get into the details of the specifics of the security concerns, if there are any, for the July 1st festivities. But I can tell you that I'm extremely comfortable with just the fact that Wellington is shut down. And we'll make the necessary efforts to make sure that it's completely sealed off for those festivities.
So I guess my last question, since I have time for another one, we did hear from Chief Jocko in testimony that there was a very serious concern from her perspective about how the convoy was treated in terms of their behavior and their outright plans to overtake the government and all the things that they said, compared to how Indigenous folks have been treated doing things that are protesting, but of course in no way are as disruptive as what we saw in the convoy. So I asked a question earlier about what the plan is, but could you please inform us what the process is of making sure that we're working with Indigenous people respectfully, and who is part of that consultation, who is part of you gathering the information? How does that relationship work, and is it ongoing or is it a one-time thing?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it's important to note what today is in the National Indigenous Peoples Day. I can tell you, again, I go back to our plenary unit, which does an amazing level of outreach. Ms. Blaney, I can assure you that when our Indigenous family members are coming to the precinct to protest or to have access, we get out front to make sure that it's facilitated as easy as possible so that there are no barriers.
Okay, so really quickly, so what is the complaint process? Is there a specific complaint process for Indigenous people to come forward when they feel that they are treated differently? Because we're hearing it again and again, but then I'm hearing responses that that's not the case. And it concerns me that there's that difference in opinion.
Through you, Madam Chair, Ms. Blaney, if there are any complaints from anybody, Indigenous family members or others, it's critically important that those complaints come into the Director's Office of the Service to be dealt with as swiftly as possible.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Mrs. Block, and then followed by Mr. Gerritsen. Mrs. Block?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I will say at the front end of my comments that having been a member of Parliament for almost 14 years, I have always appreciated the work that the PPS does in the precinct and the very respectful support that they provide to members of Parliament, as well as the work of our Sergeant at Arms. I do want to start with my experience during the convoy, as other members of Parliament have. I walked from the Hill or my office to my apartment, which is downtown, every day, and would not have experienced what others have stated they did. Although I did not engage with the protesters on a daily basis, I did not have arguments with them, and so perhaps that would be a reason why my experience was somewhat different. I also recall that we were encouraged to call PPS when we were coming from our office to the Hill. And I believe I did that for the first or second day. And after I realized that my trip to and from my office to the Hill was going to be unfettered and that I had no reason to be afraid, I no longer called the PPS to advise them that I was heading to the Hill. Mr. Brookson, in Chief Slowly's testimony earlier in this study, he used the word unforeseen. And you yourself stated here today that the numbers that started showing up on Friday made it clear that this was going to go longer than the weekend. And I guess, you know, I want to confirm what I heard in response to Ms. Goudreau's comments, that if you were alerted on January 11th, and the Ottawa Police Service was alerted on January 13th, that this convoy was coming. And if you were able to watch on the television, as well as probably many Canadians did, we watched the convoy proceed to Ottawa. We watched the crowds gathering to encourage them on. I guess I'm wondering why it took almost 2 weeks for you to sit down with other law enforcement agencies to develop a plan.
Through you, Madam Chair. Again, it's the occupation outside of the precinct was the responsibility of the POJ lead. In fairness to Mr. Slowly's testimony, it's important to note that the sheer numbers of vehicles that were en route to Ottawa provided a small snippet of what the future was to hold with that arriving. I don't think anybody was able to forecast going into a full month or some of the occurrences that were happening during that period. Again, I need to remind that I'm not a policing service. So when those operational plans were being worked up, yes, I always need to know what the context was for back to the service, but that was in the realm of the policing organizations to come up with that operational plan to effectively deal with the individuals that were on Wellington Street and on the outskirts.
Thank you very much. Again, Mr. Brookson, in response to a question earlier today, when my colleague asked if an expanded physical jurisdiction for the PPS with the same legal mandate would be a feasible undertaking, you responded yes. In his testimony, former Chief Slowly made the comment that it was one thing to be able to redraw boundaries. It was another, quite another, to work out the jurisdictional issues that would come with that. You yourself have testified that you have no mandate for criminal code investigations and that you are not a policing organization. So if the precinct is to extend well beyond Wellington, I am wondering if you could, and we have to weigh the value of having effective barriers, sensing technologies, and the other things that you said you believed were needed, and balance that with an open and free environment. What kind of force is it going to take, I guess, human resources to enable to ensure that the kind of protection we receive on the Hill or have on the Hill will be at the same level when we are walking on Slater or Queen or Albert? Thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair. Again, there'll always be an element of that an MP is off the precinct. So the precinct will the facilitation of where the precinct is being proposed to be. I don't have, as I indicated earlier, that the assessment and analysis hasn't been completed as to what investment is going to be required into the service to ensure that. I would expect that to be coming following whatever decisions are being taken. But it's also important to note that we just can't speak about one element. And again, the question specific to increasing of human resourcing is something that will most likely be necessary for certain, but there's also the requirement of the effective barriers as well as technology for, I need to have an increased situational awareness of what the precinct has underneath it.
Thank you very much for that.
Did you want to jump, any closing comment? Do you have a quick question? Or are you okay?
Is my time up?
I've been lenient with others, so I don't mind giving you one more if you want it.
Okay, I just thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, just very quickly, what are some of the lessons learned? We've heard from witnesses that many lessons have been learned, but just give us one or two.
Through you, Madam Chair, the after-action review is still ongoing within the service, and that work is being. I'm not comfortable in speaking to what some of those key lessons that were learned in open. But down the road, whether it's in camera or whatever, I'd be more than willing to come back and express some of those lessons.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. And now we'll go to Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you to the witnesses, my questions, I'm just looking for yes or no answers. If you find you can sufficiently answer with a yes or no, and I'll try to be as quick as I can so I can share my time with Mr. Turnbull. On Thursday, February 17th, the Parliamentary Protective Service erected an 8-foot-high construction fence along Wellington Street as part of the police operations that were being planned. Has that ever happened in the past? I'm wondering if Mr. Brookson knows.
Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gerritsen, I appreciate your question. I just want to be clear that decision to increase that fence height was not part of the policing response. It was
sure, but it was on Parliament property. Correct. I'm just curious if you're aware of whether or not it's ever happened in the past.
Not that I'm aware.
You're not aware of that. On Friday, February the 18th, after consultation with the Parliamentary Protective Service, as per the press release I'm looking at, the Speaker of the House of Commons and the leaders of the government, leaders of the parties, agreed to suspend the sitting day for Parliament, effectively postponing or putting on pause democracy in our country. Are you aware of any other time in the past where our democratic institution has not been able to function based on the advice of security?
February 14th, 2014.
And that incident was?
That was the shooting incident.
The shooting incident on Parliament.
October, sorry.
And finally, on Saturday, February the 19th, I was coming, this is when the Parliament precinct was in a hold and secure. I was entering the parliamentary precinct. I was literally walking through the police exercise that was going on to remove the occupiers. At the end of Bank Street, I attempted to enter. In order to enter, there was about 15 PPS individuals that were standing at what was a makeshift opening in the gate, literally moving 2 construction fences. They were using a fairly heavy-duty gauge metal chain to chain that fence together with a padlock. That's how I entered into the parliamentary precinct to participate in the democratic process that we have here. Are you aware of any other time in the past that such high security measures were used to protect the parliamentary precinct and the individuals that work here?
Through you, Madam Chair. No, Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull?
So we heard from Minister Tassi, who came before this committee, and she talked about Block 2, and she said 50% of parliamentarians in the future will actually work south of Wellington. We also heard from Senator Vernon White, who is a former Ottawa Police Chief, and the former Ottawa Police Chief, Peter Slowly, who said in his opening remarks, first is crime prevention through environmental design. Consider changes to the parliamentary precinct's physical environment, including the boundaries, to improve security. So what I wanted to just double check here was that in order to optimize security, does it make sense to have a major arterial road with cars running along it all day long through the middle of the future parliamentary precinct?
Through you, Madam Chair, I've indicated a few times that that's not supported by the service, no.
Great. And Mr. Slowly also, I think actually it was Senator White who said it would be the biggest gain in MP's security would be to shut down Wellington Street. Would you agree with that sentiment from an environmental design perspective?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask about response time. So when critical incidents happen along Wellington Street currently, who is in the best position to respond? I assume it's PPS, but I wanted to check with you because you're closer and have that situational awareness, perhaps. But
through you, Madam Chair, it would be the service, Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you. And in the future, if we wanted to guarantee PPS's response time, because I realize right now in your earlier testimony, you had said that, in fact, you're in a difficult position currently to actually have to influence decisions for something that you really don't have a mandate over. And that must be very challenging to do your job, which is to secure the parliamentary precinct. So in terms of guaranteeing a faster response time in the future, can we improve that, and what resources would you need?
Through you, Madam Chair. Again, the analysis and assessment on what would be the investment for an expanded precinct would need to be completed.
Thank you. And is that process underway?
Through you, Madam Chair. It is, and it wouldn't be something that I'd be permitted to discuss in open camera.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It's a great committee to be on. So basically, just in the interest of time, we're going to go through a quick round of giving everyone some time. So I'll give the Conservatives about 3 minutes. Liberals will get about 3 minutes. Madame Gaudreau, une minute, minute et demie, parce qu'en
A minute, minute and a half.
Mrs. Blaney, I'll give you about a minute, minute and a half as well. So we'll get a little quick question back and forth, and then we will call it a day. So we'll start with Mr. McCauley.
Great. Thanks, Madam Chair. And I want to compliment both our witnesses for their straightforward answers. Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Brookson, I just want to get back to a bit about when we talk about control, having control of, say, Wellington and Sparks. If you could just walk me through if PPS was, if we did expand the precinct and PPS was, you know, if we shut down Sparks, PPS was looking after Sparks, so to speak, like how would that interact with, say, the Ottawa Police for the actual policing of Sparks? Like, just walk me through kind of a Cole's Notes how that would look.
Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. McCauley, I appreciate the question. It would function the same way it does now. As an example, if one of our protection officers picked up on certain behavior that was deemed a concern or a threat, and it led to a subsequent arrest or detainment by the protection officer, the call goes in through our OSC to the OSC of the Ottawa Police, and priority 3 call response is provided. The Ottawa Police, because that's the limitations of 494.1 in the Criminal Code. It provides us public officer arrest, but we can't release. So that's done with Ottawa Police, and that partnership is working extremely well, and that wouldn't change.
If you were looking at it, things through like Pareto's law of averages of 80% coming from 20, what would be the 80%? Would be shutting down Wellington and Sparks? Would have the greatest impact in your mind for security?
Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. McCauley, would be the exact geography that we spoke about previously. The Senate of Canada building is still a concern for me, and its current location. So that needs to be considered as from a precinct expansion. And then the north side of Wellington, understanding where Langevin building, where it comes around, that needs to be taken under consideration, and as far down as Kent.
Would you close Wellington to OC Transpo or like to regular bus service as well?
Correct. Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. It would be completely closed off.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you again, gentlemen.
Good exchange there.
Thank you. Mr. Trimble.
I wanted to just ask for a little bit more information around the formalizing of relationships, keeping in mind that, of course, there's only so much you can share in a public meeting. But I'm just wondering, with your tabletop exercises and critical incident response and looking at it from a very collaborative perspective, we've heard testimony from numerous security experts that have said the clearer the roles and relationships and lines of communication are within any critical incident, it's imperative, right, to have the best possible, quickest possible, and most effective response. So could you give us any more information as to the MOUs and just what that process looks like, and whether you can give us any other details on how you're working through those multi-jurisdictional, I don't want to call them challenges, but certainly I'm sure there's multi-jurisdictional relationships that have to be clarified.
Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Turnbull, it's the tabletop exercising that is another element within the service that I'm extremely proud of, and that exercising framework is led by the service. The involvement that we've had with both our key partners being the RCMP and the Ottawa Police Service has been phenomenal in their participation and their guidance. Even in the sharing of specific training for the service has been equally. For me, it's... my apologies, Mr. Turnbull. I'm going to ask you to just bring me back to point on this.
Yeah, no problem. Maybe I'll just ask you a quick clarifying question. Where I was sort of going with this is it's clear to me based on your testimony today that those conversations are underway and there's lots of clarification being had. What I wanted to get to was asking you the very clear question. In terms of the parliamentary precinct, if PPS really has the mandate to protect members of parliament and their staff in order for our democracy to continue to function, it seems to me that, and I want to see if you agree with this, that PPS really should be the lead in terms of, organizing and at the top of the chain, it really should be PPS. Would you agree with that if we were to optimize MP security?
Through you, Madam Chair, when it comes to within the precinct, Mr. Turnbull, yes, I would agree with that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Excellent. Madame Goudreau.
J'ai une minute.
Oh, I have a minute. I have to concentrate. Thank you very much for being here with us today. I'm just reflecting on something here. And I think, Madam Chair, that there is an initiative between our services and the government. This being said, I think that when something arrives, when something happens, you have to put back into place your command center. I wonder if there are documents about your recommendations. Is there, and this is what I'm wondering about, is there a command center that could be adapted in the future? I'm aware of the areas of jurisdiction and the boundaries, but is there already a system in place? You have experience to look ahead and to prevent anything that might occur in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The service has a critical management center, and it was up and running throughout past winter. It was up and running for last Saturday. So this is a center that really has the fusion of the tactical leadership of the service in applying an effective response to any threat that can happen on the Hill. That our command center is also in line with. Je m'excuse, je pense que
Oui, mais
Yes. Yes, but I only have 30 seconds to go back over it. But then how can it be that in all these delays that occurred, why was there such a difficulty in terms of delays?
So the delays, I believe that the honourable member is speaking about would be more towards what the police force of jurisdiction and coming up with the operational policing response to that did not fall to the service to provide. So I think, and my apologies, I think that's where my confusion stems from.
Excellent. And thank you for that clarification. Mrs. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I've noticed in the last few weeks that I'm seeing an increase of vehicles driving between the blocks, and I don't think that they're parliamentary vehicles. So I guess my first question is, is there any preliminary plans about if the precinct grows, how will those be blocked off in a safe way that makes sense and is accessible, of course, because we're going to still probably have the buses moving through the precinct. So that's one part. But the other question that I have is there any information or numbers on what that would mean for staffing? Would we need to increase and by how much with the precinct growing?
Through you, Madam Chair. Ms. Blaney, are you talking about the increase for the services resourcing?
Yes, for staffing. If the precinct grows, of course, I would assume you're going to need more people doing the work that needs to be done. So I'm curious about if there's been any work on what that expansion would look like.
Through you, Madam Chair. So those discussions are currently, that assessment still needs to be done depending as to what the precinct's going to look like in the end. With respect to the increased traffic is obviously there's PSPC, there's maintenance that continues to take place, and so there is a requirement of some vehicle access to the to Wellington Street. It's still not under my control, Wellington Street. So I think the city has some access still, and there's emergency access, obviously, and the one priority is our parliamentary buses have access to it.
Thank you.
Excellent. I think all members will agree, and I think they've all definitely shared that we really appreciate you taking the time to come back to this committee and to make yourselves available. And we really do appreciate all of the work and the service that you provide. So with that, thank you for your time and attention today, and we hope you keep well and safe. If there's anything else you want the committee to consider, please do not hesitate to share that with the clerk, and we will make sure that members have it to look through. So please do keep well and safe.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And just in closing, as we wrap up, so I'm going to just do a little bit of quick housekeeping of any loose ends, which is we have the parking lot document, as I refer to, items that are outstanding that the analysts and clerk are working on. That should be coming out to all members within the next few weeks. The summary of testimony or evidence, which we will make sure incorporates what we heard today, is currently at translation, but they will embed what's been heard today, and then we'll have that out to all members within the next few weeks to a month, just once it can be available in both official languages. Based on where we're at right now, I think we're at a good spot. And so I do not believe a meeting on Thursday is necessary. So please, I'll just make that official that we will not have a meeting on Thursday. And in closing, just on behalf of everyone, I think it's important that we do take time to thank you, Justin. The clerk has done a fabulous job to keep us.
Well done.
As well as to the analysts and interpreters. I also want to give a quick shout out to the Multimedia Services Team, known as the MMS team, the Proceeding Verification Officer, the PVO, and the broadcast people who have actually allowed us to continue functioning, as well as to catering and the cleaning crews. Lastly, but not least, just to, I know the House leaders all work really well together to be able to give us time to meet. The whips, I would like to say, have done a good job at picking members for this committee who I've enjoyed really working with. And then just our team members. We know how much you... Pardon?
Isn't Sherry your deputy whip?
Whose?
Isn't Sherry your deputy whip?
Oh, yes.
I was going to say mention the deputy whips as well.
Okay. And so just the team members who are all on our teams, and definitely the deputy whips, because we would not be able to do it without the deputy whips and the deputy house leaders, because they are instrumental to the progress we've made. So both reports were presented today. And with that, I hope everyone keeps well and safe, and try not to be in touch until the fall. See you soon. Thank you.